country, a killer was going on a rampage with no signs of stopping, brutally murdering women during his cross-country travels as a long-haul truck driver.
In the early 1990s, he is believed to have killed at least 8 women in 4 states.
He got off on controlling, raping, killing women. That was his game.
I need to see an officer. I think I found a body alongside the road.
He punched her over and over until she cried out for her mother.
For years, he taunted the police and the public with a series of chilling, anonymous confessions.
The happy-faced killer became this ominous threat.
Then suddenly, he ended his reign of terror.
Yeah, this is Keith. I want to turn myself in.
One investigative journalist has had the rare opportunity to form a unique bond with this serial killer.
For 9 years, I interviewed Keith Hunter Jesperson, the happy-faced killer. I wanted to unravel the mind of a psychopath. I wanted to know what he was thinking before, during, and after he murdered 8 women.
But this collaboration takes a toll on the journalist.
I walked around feeling like I had darkness on my back weighing me down.
Now, for the first time ever, the killer tells his story in his own words through these never-before-seen interviews.
So I just grabbed her and I strangled her and I put her out of her damn misery. I was so mad.
That's the problem with this serial killers. We don't know when to stop.
He settled into this role now of being the devil.
Well, in Washington, it's just beautiful. It's green and it's wet and cold most of the year. But when we do got sun and beauty, you know, we got the gorge. It's completely beautiful up here. My mom, Julianne Winningham, she was free-spirited, happy, joyful. She loved the beach. I was 19 at the time, and my mom wasn't around much. February 11th, my mother calls me, and she proceeds to tell me that she's up in Utah. And she's been staying there with a friend for the past 4 weeks, but she's trying to get to Washington where her mother lives. That's basically the last time I talked to my mom.
1 month later, on March 11th, along Route 14 near Washougal, Washington, a passerby makes an alarming discovery and calls 911.
911, how can I help you? I need to see an officer. I think I found a body alongside the road. That was a mannequin at first night. It looks like a female. I can see a hand with fingernail polish.
Investigators rush to the scene, and within 24 hours, they identify the woman as 41-year-old Julie Ann Winningham. She's been beaten and strangled to death.
When I found out my mother was murdered, I completely lost it. It was tough. I drove up to where they had found my mom, looking for any kind of evidence. My mom was found naked, no jewelry, no nothing. She was just thrown off the side of the mountain right there.
After questioning Winningham's family, investigators quickly track down the first lead.
The police focused on her ex-boyfriend, Keith Hunter Jesperson. He was a truck driver. He was the last one to be with her, last one seen with her. So this is where the investigation started, was with him.
He's taken in and questioned for 6 hours.
What do you think happened to her?
I really don't know. I'm not going to point fingers at anyone. I don't know.
But they don't have enough information to arrest him, so they let Jesperson go.
But a few days later, police receive an unexpected phone call from Keith Jesperson.
Yeah, this is Keith.
am in Arizona. I want to turn myself in.
In a surprising turn, Jesperson admits to murdering Winningham and gives details to investigators.
I just grabbed her by the throat and pushed her down in the blanket. And I wanted to quit screaming at me. For too long she quit. I panicked. I had to get rid of the body somewhere, so I drove up Highway 14 up the top. Tossed her off to the side.
But Jesperson has something chilling to reveal. He admits Julie Ann Winningham is one of 8 women he's killed across the country over the past 5 years. And he makes another startling admission. He's the man who has sent anonymous confessions of his crimes to the press for the last year, each signed with a happy face. He is the happy face killer.
During his confession, he drops this bombshell, and they were staring in the eyes of the happy face killer. Law enforcement is shocked.
Keith Jesperson's fate is sealed, and he's sentenced to spend consecutive life sentences at Oregon State Penitentiary.
Thank you, that'll be all.
But Jesperson's story doesn't end there. In 2011, one investigative journalist invites the killer into his life to record a tell-all story.
I spent 9 years interviewing Keith Hunter Jesperson, the happy face killer. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and a book author. In 2011, I wrote to Jesperson, and he immediately wrote back a long letter, and we began a correspondence.
Why were you interested in Keith Jesperson?
Well, the main reason why I chose Jesperson was because he was forthcoming. And really, when you're dealing with psychopaths, serial killers, not a lot of them will admit guilt. Jesperson was ready to admit guilt and talk about it. I was really looking to dig in to a serial killer's brain and find out every single wire that went wrong. Then, Jesperson calls me one day and he says, "Hey, we can start video chatting. They just put video phones in here, and I can call you and we can see each other." You hear me?
Speak.
And what was your reaction when you first saw him, like physically?
Physically, he's a massive man, 6'8". And at the time, he weighed probably 325, 350.
It's an ongoing battle for me to get this story out there.
And to get it right, that's the point.
To get it right.
Right.
Not just to get it out there, but get it right. That's what I want. I mean, the truth, period.
Somebody 35 doesn't just wake up one day and say, "You know what? I'm going to become a serial killer today and start killing." It's a lifetime's worth of wiring that goes wrong in the brain.
For Jesperson, his first experiences with violence go back to his childhood.
I remember getting beat when I was a kid, and I remember my father, over me with his belt and stuff like that.
Extremely angry about being physically abused at home. I also think that he was internalizing the message that it's okay to be violent as a way to solve your problems or deal with your feelings. But Jesperson, like a lot of serial killers, was able to compartmentalize his life, and for a long period of time in his life, he was able to keep the monster inside of him kind of at bay.
Despite his troubled upbringing, Jesperson begins a relationship and marries Rose Huck when he's 20 years old. They soon start a family.
And they have 2 daughters and a son.
Hi.
It really seems like the typical American family.
There you go.
By all accounts, Jesperson was a doting father. But there's something stewing inside this guy as his marriage to Rose begins to crumble. Something happens in that marriage, and that flips a switch in him. His wife shuts him off sexually. And he tells me this. He says, "Yeah, she just shut me off. We weren't getting along, and no more sex."
My wife used to say, "Go stick it in the keyhole. You leave me alone." it really kind of struck me kind of like, what the hell? I don't need this.
Ultimately, the couple divorces in 1990 after 15 years of marriage.
And then my life started spiraling.
Not long after he's divorced, Jesperson kills for the first time.
Coming up,
I took her body up in the Thunder River Gorge and put her down in a ravine, and I went home and cleaned up the mess.
I'm picturing the victim in my head, going through what she's going through.
He had me around the neck and by the hair, and that's when I knew that I was in trouble.
It's no fun getting away with murder without anyone knowing about it.
He decides to really taunt the police because he wants to stick it in their face that you've got the wrong people in prison and your killer is still on the loose, ready and waiting to kill more.
In 2011, investigative journalist M. William Phelps begins his 9-year relationship with the happy-faced killer, Keith Hunter Jesperson.
I wanted to unravel the mind of a psychopath. To get inside the mind of a psychopath. I have 1 hour.
1 hour? You booked an hour?
Yeah.
Phelps discovered his divorce was finalized.
I was really angry at women when I got divorced.
And it's the same year that his new girlfriend breaks up with him.
He finds a girlfriend. He moves in with her. And what does she do to him? She takes off with another trucker across country. So Jesperson internalizes all of this, and he becomes angry at the world.
And I'm angry because of that. And because of that, I went out and I went bar hopping. That's how I met Bennett.
Jesperson walks into the B&I Tavern, and he picks up Tanya Bennett and convinces her to come back to the house he's in.
I was kind of pissed on her, and my intentions were some kind of intimacy there with her. But she was more concerned about partying later and figured that if I was after a sexual interlude, that I might as well just hurry up and get it over with, and just so we could move on and go to other things. And that was very much like what my wife would say if she was in that situation. And it angered me that I am dealing with this again.
He had a mission that night, and that mission was to have sex with a woman, taking it or not. And when she resisted, he raped her. And then he says all these thoughts just start raging inside of his head, and he just beat Tanya Bennett.
All she had to do was say the wrong thing, and I just exploded on her. I slugged her, I hit her hard, and I beat her senseless.
Jesperson told Phelps that he punched her and punched her over and over until she cried out for her mother. It's just heartbreaking.
I didn't like what had happened, and I felt kind of like, what do I do now? And so I rationalized it out that I didn't want to go to jail or prison or anything like that, so I strangled her. And I put her out of her misery, put myself out of my misery, so to speak.
When you look at Jesperson and how he explains so many of his crimes, he denies the victim. It just shows how much he wants and needs to minimize his responsibility in what he's done.
What is going through your head when he tells you these details?
I'm picturing the victim in my head, going through what she's going through, and the horror that she's facing at the end of her life, and she knows.
Jesperson turns himself in 5 years later. Detectives question him about the night he murdered Tanya Bennett.
What happens next? I go get a rope I had in the garage, went back over and tied it around her neck and tied it tight.
You believe she's dead?
I believe she's dead.
Okay. Now what happens?
I took the buttons off her jeans.
How did you remove those buttons?
With the same knife I used with the rope.
He cut off the top of Tanya Bennett's pants because he thought he left evidence that might link him to her.
I was thinking of the fingerprints are left on the buttons.
Then Jesperson establishes an alibi by going back to the bar before returning home to retrieve Bennett's body and belongings to dispose of them.
I took her body up in the Thunder River Gorge and put her down in a ravine, and I took the purse and ID card, and I threw that down off the side of the road the following morning, and I went home and cleaned up the mess.
These are human beings we're talking about here. And he's talking to me about it like, you know, another day at the mall.
The next morning, a college student discovers a body on the road switchback. The sheriff's department identifies the body as Tanya Bennett through dental records after her family files a missing persons report. Police pursue the case as a rape murder, and there are no immediate suspects. News of the murder is released to the media, and in a bizarre twist, a local woman sees a newspaper article about Tanya Bennett's body being found and comes up with an outlandish idea.
It turns out there's a 57-year-old woman named Laverne Pavlinac who is desperate to get rid of her abusive, younger live-in boyfriend, John Sosnowski. So Laverne Pavlinac begins making phone calls to law enforcement claiming that John Sosnowski is boasting about having murdered Tanya Bennett.
Incredibly, Laverne Pavlinac doesn't only implicate her boyfriend in Bennett's murder, but she also implicates herself.
Vern put herself at the crime scene and said that they had picked Tanya up and they were riding around, and that's when her boyfriend decided he wanted to have sex with her and things got out of hand.
She claimed she actually held poor Tanya Bennett down as John murdered and raped her. Well, at that point, she was now an accessory.
Later in the newspaper, I read where two people wrongfully were.
I was both elated, confused. I didn't know what to think. I had been given a license, basically, to continue to kill. Not only did I get away with a murder, but two people were convicted of the murder I committed.
It was kind of like one of those moments, where you go like, wow, that's really interesting. I was thinking maybe it isn't as hard as everyone makes it out to be.
Right. And he says it actually gave me incentive now to want to kill more because I could get away with it.
While others are paying the price for Tanya Bennett's murder, Jesperson meets his next victim a few months later.
He's driving through Mount Shasta, California one night, and he decides he's hungry, and so he pulls into a little strip mall, and that's where he spots 21-year-old Dawn Slagle.
Dawn had had a horrible argument with her then husband and had fled the home with her infant son in her arms. She ended up wandering to a local shopping mall, and while she was sitting there holding her baby, she ended up interacting with Jesperson.
I wanted to interview Dawn Slagle for many different reasons. Jesperson had told me a story. I wanted to get it from the person who was also there. Dawn Slagle, as it turns out, will be the only victim to escape from the hands of a serial killer.
You guys kind of bumped into each other? I just kept feeling like I was being watched. And I look up and I see him standing at the back of a car, and he's got his arms folded and his legs kind of crossed, and he's watching me. But then he started walking towards me and started talking to me. Somehow it got brought up that I had the fight with my husband and that I was just taking a breather. Then he brought up about the fact that he was going through a divorce and that he missed his kids. And he told me his name was Keith. He told me where he was from. He just was, in a charming way, trying to coerce me in a nice way to get into the car because my baby might be cold.
Jesperson coaxes Slagle into his car, and he drives out to a remote location where they can chat more.
And then all of a sudden, he just started asking sexual questions. he asked me about blowjobs. And he asked me if I was the kind of girl that did that for my husband. And I remember telling him, well, I don't think that's any of your business. He never would do that.
The anger, the rage goes back to the wife, always back to the wife.
There was just a whole metamorphosis that took place. And you would have to see it to believe it. It's a totally different person. And that's when I knew that I was in trouble.
Survivor Dawn Slagle is telling investigative journalist M. William Phelps about the terrifying night she spent with Keith Jesperson. At the time, she had no idea that she and her baby were face to face with a killer.
His crime with you, was it more sexually motivated or more violent motivated?
In the beginning, it was more of a sexual advance, but then when he wasn't getting what he wanted, he grabbed me. He had me around the neck and by the hair. It was like I was a little Raggedy Ann just being thrown around that car.
During the assault, Dawn struggles to hold on to her baby.
The baby was literally catapulted out of my lap. Underneath his feet, he was screaming and crying in the beginning, but then it stopped, and there was silence in the car. I was fighting him off physically, but with a man of his size, I didn't have any chance physically. This whole time, I don't know if my child's dead. And I'm trying to talk him into letting me reach down there and pick him up. I promised him, if you let me get the baby safe, I'll do whatever you want. Anything I could say to stop him from what he was doing.
Inexplicably, Jesperson suddenly stops the attack and quietly drives Dawn and her baby safely back to town.
The reason why he stopped is this. Dawn threw him off his game. And what happens with serial killers? They have this fantasy in their head. Well, she breaks that fantasy by fighting back. He just wants to get out of there.
I don't think he said 2 words to me until he'd almost gotten me to town. And then he made one final comment to me before I got out, and
what did he say?
Don't ever get in the car with somebody you don't know again. It might be the last thing you ever do.
At which point Dawn promptly ran to police, who are able to locate Jesperson almost immediately. And he gives them a very different version of events, and he is able to successfully shame Dawn thing. And the police unfortunately believed him. And when they went back to her home for an additional statement, her then husband insisted that she not press charges because he did not want to be embarrassed by the implication that his wife had gotten into the car with a stranger late at night with their son.
What type of killer would this make him? Somebody who stalks, picks up a mother with an infant, almost kills her, and then to the police blames her for everything that happened.
He blames every single one of his victims. It's his MO. He hates women. He's gonna blame a woman for everything. Dawn Slagle is no different.
Jesperson is ultimately charged with a misdemeanor. Slagle, it turns out, will be the only known victim to escape Jesperson's clutches. She has no idea that a future serial killer has been released.
When I was speaking to Dawn about this, she felt guilt. She said, maybe if I would have pressed charges, he wouldn't have went on to kill more women.
That's where that survivor's guilt comes in.
None of that is on you. You're not to blame whatsoever. I said, Dawn, you were victimized. You were assaulted. You're not responsible for anything anybody else does but yourself. Especially a serial killer.
With new perspective on Jesperson from the point of view of one of his victims, Phelps continues his correspondence with the serial killer. They've been talking now for 2 years. Jesperson tells him that after attacking Slagle and getting away with killing Bennett, He decides to brag about his crimes in an anonymous message.
I was in Livingston, Montana, and I was in a bathroom stall, and I read all the notes on the bathroom stall for a good time call so-and-so, and then I sat there and I was looking at all these notes, and I just left a note. I killed Tanya Bennett in Portland, January 21st, 1990. People took the blame so I could kill again, and I cut the fly off the jeans as proof. I was kind of gloating over the idea here. I murdered someone in Portland and had assaulted a gal down in California, and they basically just let me go. I would say that there's an idea that, look at me, I'm smarter than they are, kind of like thing that, you know, they really are looking in the wrong direction, but, you know, I didn't want to leave my name.
As Jesperson realizes he's gotten away with this, part of him is, in some ways, that bothers him. He wants people to know the killer's still out there.
But nothing comes of the message, so 2 months later, Jesperson writes again.
Second note, I was in Baker, Oregon, having a meal at the truck stop, and I went into the bathroom. I wrote another.
And Jesperson wrote, I killed Tanya Bennett January 21st, 1990, in Portland, Oregon. I beat her to death, raped her, and loved it. I'm sick, but I enjoy myself too. 2 people took the blame, and I'm free.
When police finally discover the notes, they ultimately discredit them as insufficient evidence. It could have been a prank written by anyone. Little do they know, they were the actual words of a serial killer in the making. But why the notes? What really is Jesperson's motivation for writing them?
Is it deep down inside that you want to get caught?
I think it's a flirting with the devil. It's no fun getting away with murder without anyone knowing about it.
Right.
The game is too boring, just killing. We got to have someone following us. So we actually want maybe a little cat and mouse going here.
He is somebody who is psychopathic, and he is also somebody, I think, who is incredibly narcissistic. And I definitely think that Jesperson has that inflated sense of self-worth. And not only does he know it, he wants everybody else to know it.
He decides to really taunt the police because he wants to stick it in their face that, you know what? You've got the wrong people in prison, and your killer is still on the loose, ready and waiting to kill more.
Happy-faced killer Keith Jesperson has given investigative journalist M. William Phelps chilling details about 2 of his crimes. And he admits to teasing the police with anonymous confessions, detailing what he did to his first victim.
I've known some serial killers who do taunt the police, but a majority of them don't want to get caught, so they stay under the radar.
So what does it say about Keith Jesperson?
It says that he's a narcissist. It's another way for Keith Jesperson to re-victimize his victims. He enjoys it.
I'm not here to lie to anyone. I just want to tell the truth. I want this whole thing out in the open.
For 2.5 years after that, I did nothing. I dated a few women, but I never anticipated murder again, and all of a sudden it just happened. Looks like the switch went on.
Jesperson is driving through Southern California when he pulls into a truck stop north of San Bernardino.
He tells me, I knew that day I was going to kill. It was just a matter of choosing the right victim.
I got a knock on the door when I was sitting there, and here was this woman called Claudia.
He told me that I think her name was Claudia.
She had nothing on her other than clothes. She had no wallet, no ID.
He describes Claudia as between 21 and 25 years old and blonde-haired. And she says to him, I was hoping to get a ride into Phoenix. And he says, all right, come on in.
I told her my next stop is going to be Cabazon. I don't know if you ever saw Pee Wee Herman's Great Adventure.
Yeah.
Well, the dinosaur head is in the parking lot of Cabazon, and I parked there. and she was going to go out the highway and hitch a ride into L.A. And it was like 112 degrees in the shade out there at the time. She decided she didn't want to stand out there on the highway. And here she was back in my truck again. So what the hell you want? She said, well, I think I'll just ride with you to Phoenix, Arizona. And I said, well, okay, I guess, if you really want to ride. She tried to play me. And I didn't like being played.
When Claudia got in his truck and started telling him what to do, right away he said, "You're gonna die. You're not taking advantage of me."
So that's being played.
Yeah, it was a trigger for him. He tries to paint the victim as someone who needed to be killed, someone who needed to be taken off the face of the earth.
How soon after that did you kill her?
Well, it would be like 2 hours, I guess.
He tells me, I put duct tape over her mouth, I duct taped her hands behind her back, and I just let her sit in the back of my cab as I drove, thinking about, what am I going to do with her? During those 2 hours for Claudia, he raped her. And then he tells me, I pull into a secluded area, and I strangle her. Her body was found in Blythe, California. And it's found kind of off the road a little bit, under some brush. Kind of a secluded area, some rocks. No identification. Investigators classify Claudia as California Jane Doe. And they claim she's a transient. And they take the investigation no further.
Following Jesperson's confession years later, Claudia becomes his second confirmed murder victim.
Claudia, but she's a Jane Doe still today.
I have to assume that you knew that killing was wrong while you were doing it. If so, why continue?
You know deep down that you can kill again, and you know you got away with it once, so you'll feel that you'll get away with it again.
Around the same time Claudia's body is found, Jesperson strikes again in Turlock, California.
I pulled into Turlock Rest area on Highway 99 southbound at around 3:30 in the morning, and I ran into this gal there. I told her, I basically didn't want any company, but she wanted to have company anyway.
To hear Jesperson tell it, she was a sex worker who climbed into his truck, even though he told her he wasn't interested in her services.
There's probably 30 of them working on, and she was the first one to jump up on the side of my truck.
And it startles him. And he tells me, he said, that angered me.
And that in and of itself was reason enough for him to kill her. He bragged about that subsequently and dismissed her as a quote-unquote prostitute.
He's gonna bind her, he's gonna rape her, and then he's gonna kill her. That's his thing now.
I strangled her and put her out of her misery.
And killing somebody by strangulation, which Jesperson did to every one of his victims, is a personal crime. That means Jesperson wanted to stare in their eyes and watch the life leave their body when he strangled them. And he loved that feeling. He loved the power and the control.
I took her down to the Blueberry Hill Cafe in Livingston, where I left her body in that parking lot. I put her face down in the dirt. I kicked the back of her head a couple of times, put some tumbleweed over the top of her, and drove off. And that's basically the end of that. I mean, it wasn't a big thing. I had taken care of this, and it was done.
Days later, a female body is discovered behind the Blueberry Hill Cafe, and investigators soon identify her as 32-year-old Cynthia Lynn Rose. Her murder remains unsolved for 4 years until Jesperson confesses to dumping a body at the same time and place Rose went missing.
When the detectives came and saw me in 1996, they told me they were working a Cynthia Lynn Rose case. And I assumed that was the case that we were talking about, was the one I left in Livingston.
Jesperson accepts responsibility for her death. But in 2009, at the first time, and he makes a startling admission.
They showed me a Cynthia Lynn Rose picture, I said, I don't know who that is. And they said, it's Cynthia Lynn Rose. I said, well, that may be Cynthia Lynn Rose, but it's not mine. I didn't do her.
So if Jesperson didn't kill Cynthia Rose, and he killed another woman, that woman is buried still behind the Blueberry Hill Cafe.
Mine is still there.
In 2009, serial killer Keith Jesperson makes a stunning revelation about one of his victims.
I didn't do it. It's not mine.
One of the things he keeps telling me over the years is my Jane Doe, identified as Cynthia Rose. I didn't kill her.
They had this idea that they could just point a finger at a serial killer and say, well, this must be him because he was in the area at the time or somewhere close to the time.
He says, look, I'm not saying I didn't kill somebody that night. I'm saying I didn't kill Cynthia Rose.
If this is true, then another body, which remains undiscovered, is still buried in Livingston, California.
Well, I think she would be still there. The powdered dirt was about 6 inches deep. If someone drove over the top of her, the dirt may have floated over the top of what was left, and she could be a foot down underground. You know, it's like throwing a watch on your grass lawn, and eventually it disappears into the lawn. I assume they would have found her, but they didn't, and that's where we stand right now.
It's a big coincidence if there's another victim out there who Jesperson murdered and placed behind the Blueberry Hill Cafe that was killed on the same exact day that Cynthia Lynn Rose went missing from the rest stop and also found behind the Blueberry Hill Cafe. I have no doubt, 99.9%, that Cynthia Lynn Rose is Jesperson's victim.
Despite Jesperson's claims, no new investigation opens up, and authorities still consider Cynthia Lynn Rose one of his victims. By the end of summer 1992, Keith Jesperson has taken 3 lives over the course of 2 years. Tanya Bennett, Claudia, and another victim law enforcement believes to be Cynthia Lynn Rose. Now, 3 years into their phone interviews, Phelps sees that Jesperson is a friendly smile and a free ride in his truck.
2 months later, Jesperson strikes again, and this time it's in Salem, Oregon, and it's a sex worker named Lori Ann Pentland.
Lori Ann Pentland is a 26-year-old woman who just approaches Jesperson at a truck stop when he pulls in. She doesn't know it, but she's walking up to the devil incarnate.
And he said that was her karma when she got in that truck with him, that it was going to happen to her.
It's kind of like fate, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. We both lined up with the stars to be at a certain point at a certain time, and it just happened the way it did.
I think Jesperson calling it fate is yet another version of him taking the responsibility off of himself and giving it to something else. Now, Jesperson claims that they engaged in sex and that she tried to double charge him for it afterwards. So again, it is this fury at being played or taken advantage of, and he used this as justification for killing her.
But what's different here is he's getting bolder. While he's got her pinned down, he says, you know, you don't know who you're messing with. I'm going to strangle you to death. She thinks he's messing around, and that enrages him. So he shows her.
In his own style, he strangles her and kills her, and then dumps her body in Salem, Oregon.
How do you do something like that, though, and then go to sleep that night? I mean,
I sleep pretty well. If the death is over with, my only concern was to get away from it. Once I left it there on the side road or wherever I wanted to put it.
It? You said it. The victim, you mean?
the victim, the body, the corpse was left.
These subtle nuances really describe the narcissist, the person that he is, and he doesn't even realize it.
I think Jesperson is a psychopath plus. He has all the classic traits of a psychopath. And I think he is also somebody who has a high degree of sadism. And so all of those things, I think, come together to form the person that he is.
Jesperson puts a lot of importance on this particular murder, saying to me that now I'm a bona fide serial killer. With this one here, I really felt like I delved really into this expert, professional killer. And he likes it.
Does it get easier each time?
I became aware of how the system investigates me. Knowing full well that they're not going to investigate me. They're going to investigate the next of kin first. Then they're going to investigate the family or the worker or something that has to do with their family. By the time they get around to me, I'm months down the road. I'm long gone.
You're a seasoned killer by now.
Sure.
I find it interesting that you're having these conversations that are very atypical, right? I mean, who has these conversations with serial killers? Forensic psychologists, maybe police officers and lawyers who are defending them.
That was part of what kept me going in this, is I had this opportunity that really no one else gets, right?
Right.
To talk to the serial killer, ask him anything I wanted, him to trust me 100% now, and get answers out of him.
Coming up, M. William Phelps shares more about his 9 years of communicating with convicted murderer Keith Jesperson.
You're more family to me than my family is. I get to talk to you all the time.
And how, with his later victims, Jesperson began evolving as a killer.
I'm out there progressively getting a better killer.
If you look at the progression of his murders, they get better and better and better because he gets better and better and better at murder.
He's lost control because he is choosing a victim that he can be directly identified with. I think for Jesperson, this was the most personal killing for him.
And Keith Jesperson taunts the public.
I write a letter to the Oregonian newspaper, and in that letter was one little smiley face.
Now they realize there's a serial killer out there.
And the happy-faced killer is born. Serial killer Keith Jesperson, infamously known as the happy-faced killer, is confessing never-before-heard details of his 5-year crime spree to investigative journalist M. William Phelps.
He got off on killing and controlling and raping and binding women. That was his game.
I strangled her and put her over mystery.
Their conversations took place while Jesperson was serving multiple life sentences in prison. Years after the happy-faced killer was caught and convicted for his crime, Jesperson was thinking when he took the lives of 8 women. At this point, they've been speaking for almost 4 years. Jesperson claims his first 4 murder victims had made the fatal error of approaching him and therefore sealing their fate. But with victim number 5, something new happens. It's Jesperson who makes the first move, using an act of kindness as bait.
The one that happened in Williams, where I picked her up out of Corning, California, that she was a homeless and she needed a bite to eat. I could sit there in the restaurant and see that she was actually hungry. Nobody was feeding her. And I told the waitress when she came over to feed her, but don't tell her who's feeding for the meal. You know, you could say I was testing the waters, let's say, with this person, but I was actually trying just being a nice guy. But it turned out sour because she ended up just riding with me. And then I think it's the conversations I have with these people when I find out that they're not really the nice people I thought they were. Everything's okay, everything's fine. Until all of a sudden that one moment where I realized she was dead at any moment.
A serial killer can look at someone and see V on their head, meaning victim. A serial killer can walk into a room and pick out the woman who is most vulnerable. She's going to be easy prey. And they realize this, and they utilize it, and they use it to their advantage.
Serial killers who are organized and lure their victims tend to use one of two strategies. They either ask for help or they offer help. Communicate to this person that you can trust me. And we tend to think that people who do nice things are nice people. So this is Jesperson's way of trapping this victim.
I would continually push him about victim number 5. Come on, Jesperson, details. Anything. What was her name? How old was she?
I can't remember. Anyway.
What's stopping him from giving more detail?
I think there's a combination of he just doesn't remember, and these women were killed very quickly. See, a lot of his victims who are named, he didn't kill them right away. He bound them, kept them, he learned things about them. So with these Jane Does, he kind of picked them up and kind of murdered them almost immediately, within a day, I'd say. So he didn't learn much about them. And for a guy with as much internal volcanic rage as he has, you know, there can be blackouts where
I feel bad about what he did.
no, he can't care. He can't love. It's just not there. He would tell me, I don't know why. It just is. I don't care. A psychopath can't.
The victim is discovered by police about 200 miles south of Corning in Santanella, California. The body had been placed on a pile of rocks along the side of a road. A forensic artist draws a sketch from her remains, and investigators release it to the public in hopes of identifying her. Her murder remained unsolved until after Jesperson's arrest 2 years later, where the happy-faced killer claimed her as his 5th victim.
She's a Jane Doe still today that we're trying to get identified.
I'm hoping one of the Jane Doe's families will come forward and say, I think my missing daughter, cousin, wife might be one of your victims.
But as Jesperson's murders increase, so does his desire to tell people about his crimes. But who can he tell it to?
Keith Hunter Jesperson, as with many quote-unquote successful serial killers, was compartmentalized to the extent that he could pass as normal. This was a man who was married for 15 years, who had 3 children before he started killing. He didn't look like a serial killer.
But what's going on inside of him that he can't contain is that he needs people to know that he's doing this. This is starting to bother him, that only he knows that he's the guy.
He grows increasingly resentful that Laverne Pavlinac and John Cisnowski are in jail, taking credit for the murder of Tanya Bennett, his first crime, 4 years earlier, as if it were some kind of an accomplishment.
In May of 1994, Jesperson decides to write another anonymous confession. This time, not on a bathroom wall, but to a newspaper.
I write a letter to the Oregonian newspaper, which falls on a desk. I wrote out what I did, five different murders, and I said, this is the Bennett murder is the first of 5. You need to settle this. You need to go ahead and make this case, reopen it, and get those innocent people out of prison. And in that letter, there's the very top of the page was one little smiley face. Now, I don't really remember doing it. It's like an afterthought.
It's the first of a few taunting letters to the Oregonian, the largest newspaper in Oregon. Jesperson is looking for a way to step out from the shadows.
Letters were signed with a trademark little smiley face, kind of a have a nice day. I think that it was just to add insult to injury, that he was happy he was getting away with it.
Of course, the media is all over it because now they realize there's a serial killer out there.
That is what was the incentive for Phil Stanford, who was the crime reporter for the Oregonian, in creating the moniker, the Happy Face Killer. and it stuck.
I'm in Houston, Texas, November of 1994. I'm going like, my God, man, I look at it, here's my letter to the Oregonian newspaper, and they have a whole story on this thing.
Jesperson is ecstatic. He's excited. Now he is a nicknamed serial killer. There's not many that get a nickname. And he says, whew, I love that. Because of him being a nobody when he was a child in the eyes of his father. A lot of this has to do with proving I'm somebody. I am happy-faced killer.
Even though he admits to the murders, Jesperson doesn't give any information that could lead to him being identified. Why do you suppose he starts haunting the media and the police and remaining anonymous?
It's the cat and mouse. Serial killers love the game. He didn't want to get caught, and he wanted to continue to kill. And he was trying to really up his brand, right? Get more kills under his belt, become a bigger... One of the things important to Jesperson was being one of the most famous serial killers.
Now the investigators are familiar with the letters that the media are getting. What are they doing with this information?
They're trying to put together a string of murders and connect them. Because they know they have a serial killer basically on the loose, right? Who is now haunting them. So they're digging in deep. It's like they know who the killer is, but they don't have his name.
The happy-faced killer became this ominous threat in a regional sense to people who knew that there was a killer who was moving around and a threat to everybody. There became a fear that there was somebody out there at large who was still killing people.
The pressure is on. Law enforcement needs to get this guy behind bars, but they have no idea who he could be. It's game on for them, and they're lost. They're lost.
It's 1994, and law enforcement knows there is a serial killer out there, nicknamed the Happy-Faced Killer.
When I was confessing in these letters, I wasn't telling the absolute truth, because if I was, they'd all break it all down and come after me with the absolute truth.
Investigators have little to go on. How do you find a nationwide serial killer who has covered his tracks? There's no pattern, no evidence pointing to a suspect, and no murder weapon.
While I'm out there killing, nobody knows who I am. I'm out there progressively getting a better killer. And I have total anonymity because I can do things knowing full well that no one's going to discover who I am.
He's in the mood now. He wants to control, he wants to dominate, and he wants to have power over another woman.
In August of 1994, Jesperson comes upon another woman at a truck stop in Tampa, Florida. And just as he did with his last victim, he lures her in, perfecting his method of attracting women to kill.
I pull in and I see this gal standing out in front of the parking lot trying to get a ride by somebody. So once I got my truck parked, I just walked back out there and asked her where she was going. And she told me that she was headed to Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and that she needed a ride right there. Her name is something like Susan or Susanette or Suzanne. I said, if you want to ride with me to that area, I pointed to my truck, and once I got that in her head, I turned around and walked back away from her and went back to the truck stop. And about an hour later, I look up and I'm in a booth and she's standing over me.
He's figuring himself out as a killer. That's what he's doing. The charming person that the psychopath is laying it on thick. They get that fly into their web. And now they become the spider, the monster who's going to bite, kill the fly.
We drove up north. Now I had to fuel up the truck. But I also had to stop in and make sure she had a shower because she wasn't smelling very well. She had been on the road a long time. Her flower dress, man, it was faded. And she ordered a spaghetti dinner, all you could eat, which she ate 2 helpings and then some. She was starving.
So there's this twisted benevolence in his generosity, and he uses it as a means to soften his eventual action.
So they're in the back of the cab, and they're taking like a break. He needs a rest. He says, I was nuzzling up against her, and I decided I want to have sex with her. He says, yes, we are.
She gets out of a butt-curling scream, like it shocked her, like it scared the hell out of her. And I said, what the hell was that? You know, you don't be yelling and screaming like that. I mean, I don't want that around me. So I told her to be quiet. And the more I told her to be quiet, the more she wanted to scream louder. So I put my hand over her mouth and told her, you really need to shut up. So I decided at that moment I would just kill her and put her out, you know, just end the whole situation. So I strangled her and put her out of misery.
Jesperson quickly dumps her body on the side of the highway just west of Crestview, Florida, about 400 miles from where he met her in Tampa. She's not discovered until about a month later by a road crew working along the interstate.
The case I responded to was a Jane Doe that was discovered on the interstate. I'm Dennis Haley. I was a special agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The body was very badly decomposed. It was mostly skeletal remains.
On the scene, in addition to the skeletal remains, there were items of property. My name's Emily Speed. I'm the senior forensic investigator for the District 1 Medical Examiner's Office in Florida. There was a floral dress. There was a sash with some geometric, almost jewelry type figures. There was also what was described in medical examiner reports, cinch bands, but they looked very similar to, say, zip ties. She died from presumed strangulation based on the cinch bands that were present around the cervical vertebrae when she was found.
The biggest part of the investigation at that time is trying to determine who is she, where's she from, and then from there, try to find out what happened to her. In 1994, when we had a reconstruction done of our victim, we never felt like we had a real good likeness of our victim. So we were never able to identify her. And it wasn't until approximately a year later when we learned about Jesperson and learned that our girl here in Florida was one of his victims.
Over the next several years, Detective Haley tries to obtain information from Jesperson from prison to help identify his victim, but he gets nowhere.
Jesperson, in one of his letters, wrote me, he said that his attorney told him not to speak to me. I've never given up on this girl, and I've always wanted to find out who she is and return her to her family.
And this is maybe 4 years now into our fourth. And in the package are letters that Florida law enforcement had written to him over the years, asking Jesperson over and over again, can you help us identify one of your victims, Jane Doe, Florida? And Jesperson says to me, he says, these guys think I'm going to help them? No freaking way. So I took these letters, I called Haley, and I said, he trusts me. Let me work him on this. And they said, let's do it.
Phelps was very crucial in Jesperson's cooperation. And in trusting Phelps, Jesperson would communicate with me to help us in doing a reconstruction of her.
Now all of a sudden now they want me to help them find out who she is, which I found kind of just bizarre.
I tried to find humanity in this guy. That was one of my goals is, all right, I want to try to find out if there is one iota of empathy in this person.
I'm never going to get out of prison, so they just want this case settled. We want to find out who this person could be. I'm trying to bring back my memory of what she looks like.
Jesperson indicated that he had started to draw and gotten fairly good at it. My name's Paul Moody. I'm a forensic imaging specialist, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. And so he sent me a couple of drawings that he had done and seemed to be fairly well executed. He felt that he could draw her, and I said, go right ahead, give it your best shot.
How would you describe her?
She was a white girl. She was 5'8", blonde hair. This is a really kinky hair.
image fit the bones that we had, and we knew those were the correct bones.
Paul took Jesperson's picture along with the skull and came up with a new picture of our victim. When Jesperson saw this picture, all these emotions come running back, so it hit home to him that this was a pretty close likeness of our victim.
She looks just like she did when I killed her back then.
In 2014, the happy-faced killer, Keith Jesperson, collaborates with investigators on a digital reconstruction of one of his unidentified victims.
I had a serial killer helping me, very rare opportunity.
The result is a portrait so real that the killer himself finds it disturbing.
She looks just like she did when I killed her back then. And I didn't want that in myself.
Why?
It's kind of eerie. Well, you're looking at someone I killed 20 years ago, and it's kind of like freaky or spooky.
So here's a serial killer now with a conscience. Is that what you're saying? You're feeling remorse, guilt?
It's like I'm staring back at this person that I killed. It's just like she's alive and she's looking back at me and I'm being judged by her. I couldn't have that myself. I just couldn't have it.
I don't think there's any sense of remorse or guilt or regret. I don't think he saw this picture and was like, oh my God, what did I do? I think it was more along the lines of, this is creeping me out. I don't want this in my cell. It makes me feel weird, uncomfortable. He wants nothing to do with that. No reminders of who he has killed.
When the final image was done of our victim 6, she came alive to me. She's not just a skeletal remains anymore. She's a person.
Investigators hold out hope that someone will recognize this woman and contact them.
All this takes is one person out there who knows of a family member missing from Florida or Nevada who could fit this description and fit the time frame to come forward, and we can test your DNA against hers, and we can bring her home to her family where she belongs.
Jesperson kills Jane Doe, Florida in August of 1994. 5 months pass before he meets his next victim across the country in Washington state. Let's talk about number 7, Angela Soubry's. The Angela Soubry's case is one that kept you up at night.
Yeah. This is the one that he wanted to talk about the most. And this is the most horrific of the murders, if they can even be judged on a scale. Angela Soubry's, January 1995. Talk me through that. Where are you heading? What's going on?
My boss put me in a motel at the Ritz Hotel in Spokane, and at the Ritz is where I found Angela Soubry. She came in off the street, and I walked up to her while she was in the bar and offered her a drink, and I offered her my motel room, and we could share the room for the night, room 425, and that's where we spent the night. We had pizza and beer sent in, and we sat there and watched movies, and he gave me a display of what exotic means. And so the next morning when I woke up, which was only about an hour of sleep, because we didn't sleep very much that night, I got up and I went driving. Well, I'd left Angela my phone number to call me if she wanted to get in contact with me again, because I thought we had a great time.
What are you thinking when he's telling you about his fun night with her? Is he trying to get a reaction out of you?
He's always trying to get a reaction out of me. He wants me to say in that moment, hey, how was it? Like I'm his friend. Because every woman to him is an object that he objectifies. And sure enough, in that hotel room, he's objectifying her.
A few days later, Angela Soubry calls Jesperson while he's driving through Wyoming. She asks him for a ride from Spokane to Colorado to visit her dad.
My intention was to give her a ride from Spokane and all the way over to Fort Collins, Colorado, which I guarantee her safety up until that point.
A serial killer is telling a girl, I can guarantee your safety.
Yeah. The first time we stopped in, it was Fort Bridger, Wyoming, to make a phone call to her dad. I used my dad's credit card number. They had a big fight over something. Well, she said she was pregnant, and she said that she argued with her dad over an abortion, which I only have her word saying that's what happened.
And then she said she was going to dump him on this guy in Indianapolis. They're going to hurry and get married, and everything's going to be fine.
Jesperson tells me she wants to go to the man who is not the father of the child, and that she's going to tell this guy he is the father. That enrages him.
That pissed me off. I was like, it's not nice. But when it comes down to using someone else and destroying someone else's life, and knowing full well that's what you're doing, I realized that she was dead at any moment. I told her, you need to get out of the truck, you need to find another ride, because I don't trust myself around you right now.
Oh, so you knew the monster was coming.
I knew it was there.
He was very adamant about having me drive her to Indianapolis. We headed east. I pulled off into the rest area and parked. And I told her, this is it. I'm not going any further. But she was mad now because we were in a rest area. So I went to sleep. She reached down and grabbed me, shook me to wake me up. We need to get going, she said. We need to get going. I said, no, listen, we need to rest. I told her, you really don't know who you mess with. Just quit it. Just quit it. And then she pushed on me again, and I said, I've had it. I had it. So I just grabbed her, and I strangled her, and I put her out of her damn misery. I was so mad. Now, once I strangled her, then I realized I used my dad's credit card number to call her dad, and I thought, man, that's stupid. I'm gonna have to get rid of her body somehow.
So he's making mistakes. Now he's got a dead girl in his cab, and he's allowed her to use his credit card to call her father. So once they find her and identify her, they just backtrack and bang, they're gonna catch him.
What I ended up doing was, I thought about it. I drove east. I stopped and got a couple of hamburgers, and I ate them there while she was in the back, and I was kind of comically telling her, well, if you'd behaved yourself, you could have had one of these hamburgers.
We're talking about a woman he beats and strangles and murders, and he's laughing about it. He didn't care about anything but himself.
I reasoned it out that if I tied her into my trailer, then I dragged her down the road, and I'd get rid of all identification. Tied her by the ankles underneath my trailer, and I drove out onto the freeway and drove for about 12 miles with her face down on the pavement. I pulled over the side of the road, got out with my side cutter pliers, cut the rope that was holding onto the truck, dragged what was left of her into the shoulder and left her there. What was left of her, I know the next question will be, from about her ears forward were gone. Her chest cavity was gone. She lost her arms and her hands, because I put her hands taped up in front of her so that I'd lose them first. And they never found the body for about 8 months.
I would always ask him, was she alive or dead when you tied her underneath that truck? Because there's always the chance that she could have been alive, that he was trying something new. One time he tells me, who do you think I am? When I ask him, I said, you're a serial killer. That's a fair question. Well, she was dead. And then he'd say, I think she was anyway.
Is it a fact?
I'm back in the moment. It brings it back and affects me.
Yeah, it's difficult just hearing you describe it.
Yeah. This is very difficult stuff.
By the end of January 1995, Keith Jesperson, known in the newspapers as the Happy Face Killer, has killed 7 women over the span of 5 years while crisscrossing the country as a long-haul truck driver. So far, he's managed to elude law enforcement. But how do you catch a serial killer when there's no apparent pattern for his victims?
Happy Face as a killer is making headlines, but in terms of an investigation, they're no closer to catching Jesperson than they were when he first started killing.
Just a few months after killing his 7th victim and dragging her body under his truck, Jesperson is back in Portland where he rekindles a romance with an ex-girlfriend. 2 years earlier, Jesperson met Julianne Winningham at a truck stop in Oregon, and they began a brief romance. At the time he met Julie, Jesperson had already strangled 5 women to death.
We had dated. I actually took her for a drive in my truck for about a week, and we dated for months.
He actually likes her. She's his type. Blonde, petite, pretty, blue eyes. Whenever he's in town, he stops by, picks up Julie. They go out, he buys her booze, they go to a hotel, they have sex, and it's kind of, in his mind, a normal relationship. He even picks up his kids, has pizza with Julie, the kids, they go to theme parks, all of that stuff. And she has no idea that she's dating a psychopath.
She was a free-spirited, independent woman who didn't necessarily want to be tied down.
I said goodbye to her in '93, and she left. I heard that she left and went to Utah to try her luck there.
And 2 years later, Julie is back in Portland when she and Keith Jesperson reconnect.
I met her on a Sunday morning, I think it was the 5th of March of 1995, and we hit it off again.
He gets back with Julie, and he wanted to have sex with her. He wanted to party again. Did he want to rekindle some romance? Hell no.
But after a few days together, the couple has an argument.
She had gotten into trouble for driving while under the influence, and she wanted Jesperson to bail her out of it financially.
And then he claims that Julie starts talking about, and I want you to, is really grinding on him.
We were having this argument in the truck. She was facing 2 DWIs in court that morning, and she told me that she wanted me to keep her from jail. She kept telling me that I promised to keep her out of prison, out of jail, and that I need to follow through this. And I told her, well, you know, I only know one way I can keep you out of jail.
He was able to twist this as her trying to take advantage of him financially by making him believe that they were in a relationship when she was trying to use him.
I was kind of tired of her issues anyway because she was just a money pit. She kept asking for different things. And so I just felt that I should just kill her right at that moment, which I used my hands to strangle her and put her out of her misery. Or my misery, I guess, the way I looked at it.
He ties Julie up. He puts tape over her mouth. He rapes her. He strangles her. And he said, I let go of her. And all of a sudden she comes back to life. And he said, she's mumbling through the tape how she's going to be this great mother to my kids. And please let me live. And I'll be your wife. He also tells me that as he's strangling Julie Winningham to death, and her eyes are bulging, he tells her, you, Julie, you're my 8th murder victim. I am a serial killer. And then he kills her.
So why do you think that Jesperson told Julie Winningham that he was a serial killer?
He is such a narcissist that he needs people to know who he is. It's so important to him. So this is one more way to victimize Julie before he kills her.
I think for Jesperson, this was the most personal killing for him. He wanted to punish her and spent quite a bit of time torturing her and making sure that she knew, I have fooled you, and so before you die, I'm going to look in your eyes and make sure you know how little you knew me.
Killing Julie Winningham was Jesperson taking a huge risk. Jesperson knew Julianne Winningham. He had had a previous relationship with her. Why did he take this risk? What I believe is he was getting lazy. In his mind, he's thinking he's better than he is. Whatever I do, nobody's gonna find out because I'm that good. I've killed 8 women.
When Jesperson murdered Julie, he crosses a line that he had set for himself. He, to date, has picked strangers, people that would not be associated with him. Now he has lost control because he is choosing a victim that he can be directly identified with.
Off the guardrail down to where some piles of garbage where I left her there. Now I thought about later going back and removing the body, or maybe at least putting the body further into the woods, but it was an afterthought, and it never happened. So here I am. That's the one they caught me on.
Jesperson goes back on the road, hoping to put distance between him and Winningham's body. But once her family points investigators to Jesperson, they track him down in New Mexico for questioning.
Investigators go to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and they wait for him at one of his stops. And he's arrested at gunpoint, and he's brought in for questioning.
What do you think happened to her?
I really don't know. I'm not going to point fingers at anyone. I don't know.
He plays stupid. I don't know what you're talking about. Julie, I haven't seen her in years. They have nothing. They have to let him go.
Once I found out they were on to me, my fear grew. And that's why at the very end, I thought about suicide and tried it.
And this is when he sits down and he pens a letter to his brother, Brad. And he admits to killing 8 women. And then he says he goes to the drugstore and he gets all sorts of over-the-counter pills. And he says, I took all these pills. And then I woke up. Because it wasn't enough to kill me.
When his brother Brad got that letter, he showed it to his father, Les Jesperson, and they turned it over to law enforcement. That letter becomes a written confession that is signed and dated by Jesperson himself. So that becomes the most incriminating bit of evidence against Jesperson.
Yeah, this is Keith. I am in Arizona. I want to turn myself in.
I called the police up. I turned myself in. The Wilcox, Arizona police came and arrested me. They hauled me to Clark County.
But what investigators don't know is that they're focused on not only Julianne Winningham's killer. They have no idea they're about to arrest the happy-faced killer. Jesperson does something that's pretty smart, if you're a serial killer. When he gets with his attorney, he begins to discuss how he's going to lay out all these murders. And how he's going to get the best deal. And how he's going to avoid the death penalty.
In 1995, I went public and I said, I am responsible for my crime. You take care of this. I want to settle all my cases.
At the very end, there was 8 different murders they linked to Jesperson. And that was in Florida, California, Oregon, Wyoming, and the state of...
And the deal is 3 murders, death penalty, off the table, life in prison. And that's what he wants. He really focused on, I don't want the death penalty. He didn't want to die. He was scared of dying.
As part of the plea deal, Jesperson is convicted of the murders of Tanya Bennett, Lori Ann Pentland, and Julianne Winningham. With these 3 consecutive life sentences, he will go immediately to prison without a trial. He needs to stand in front of a judge to admit to his crimes and face the families of his victims.
For my own personal reasons and to accept responsibility for the death of Julianne Winningham, I am pleading guilty.
Murdering was a drug to him. He loved it, he enjoyed it, and he had no remorse. None. And he still don't have any remorse to this day. They let me stand within a 1.5 feet of the man who did this to my mother, who I had heard his confession in court, and I was the one who got to say the rebuttal. I stood to him and told him how I felt. You had taken a lovely woman, a mother, a sister, an aunt, and as Christians, we forgive you, and God will be punished in the way you deserve to be punished. Because his life's in hell. He's locked in prison. That's it, period.
He agreed to a sentence of life in prison, and that's where he is now, in Oregon State Prison.
After Jesperson's arrest, The two people who were wrongly convicted for the murder of Tanya Bennett, Laverne Pavlanak, and John Sosnowski are exonerated after spending 4 years in prison. But Jesperson's story isn't over yet.
Do you still keep in contact with Keith Jesperson, the happy-faced killer?
I do.
Investigative journalist M. William Phelps spent almost a decade getting into the mind of convicted serial killer Keith Jesperson, infamously known as the happy-faced killer.
You're more family to me than my family is. I get to talk to you all the time. I bet you accept my phone calls. You're a friend.
How would you define your friendship with Keith Jesperson?
I would define the friendship with quotes to qualify it, that it's not a friendship.
You had a 9-year correspondence with Jesperson. That's pretty unusual. What did you feel you needed to do to keep this guy talking?
I had to be his friend. I had to act like his friend. Doesn't mean I was his friend. I was playing a role. And I did that for one reason. And that is to just build the camaraderie between...
Did you ever change your mind with a victim?
No, I did not.
So there's no way that a victim could plead with you, talk you, please don't hurt me, and you would change your mind.
They have a plight. I understand their plight. I just really didn't care at the time.
This guy would talk about strangling a woman, staring in her eyes, waiting for life to leave her, and he'd be smiling. He'd talk about it like he was talking about a football game that he watched.
You were traumatized by this, right?
Absolutely traumatized by it. To sit there and really have to smile and be his friend, knowing what he's done, is psychological torture.
In 2017, Phelps releases his book on Keith Jesperson, Dangerous Ground, My Friendship with a Serial Killer. Did you get what you wanted out of him? Do you think you accomplished over the course of 9 years what you were hoping to?
My goal was simple at its beginning. It was to unravel the mind of a psychopath, strand by strand by strand, and really figure out what he thought. I mean, if I look back now, as far as that goes, I nailed it.
Do you still keep in contact with the happy-faced killer?
I do. One of the reasons is because I want to keep him on the line, see what he's going to say. But my relationship with Jesperson is just about over. And it's over because I just can't do it anymore. And soon, the leash will be completely cut. I'm not going to get any new information out of him. And I know that he's just playing that psychopath game. You know, he wants to continue to play chess. And it's checkmate for me, dude. I'm done.
Often when I'm driving in the car and I look in the rearview mirror and there happens to be a long haul truck behind me, I get this feeling of fear, and that quickly transfers into remorse for his victims and on a very deep level for the Jane Does, the women who have now lost their lives and their names and their narrative because of Keith Hunter Jesperson.
I just mostly miss seeing my mom, being able to give her a hug. I mean, she's just a good person, and I would just like to hug her and say, hey, this was all a dream.
His life without his mom's just so heartbreaking. And reliving that every day, I feel so bad for him. And all these victims' family. It's a real life horror story, it really is. For any family.
Keith Jesperson has been convicted of the murders of Tanya Bennett, Jane Doe Claudia, Lori Ann Pentland, Cynthia Lynn Rose, Jane Doe California, and Julie Winningham. He's serving 6 consecutive and concurrent sentences, adding up to nearly 120 years. Keith Hunter Jesperson will spend the rest of his life in prison. Do you think the victim saw justice?
Is there justice in where Jesperson is spending the rest of his life? I believe there is. I mean, what is justice, though? Your loved one is strangled to death by a serial killer. What is justice? Your loved one is gone. Gone for good.
Let me ask you something. If you hadn't been caught, would you have continued to kill?
There's no doubt in my mind that I would have continued to kill. That's the problem with us serial killers. We don't know when to stop.